For as long as Pokemon has existed and thus been played competitively, there have been Pokemon who emerge as, if not necessarily the outright best, the Pokemon that are most easily thrown on a team because of just how important what they offer is. It makes sense, of course, that such pokes often are the best, or among the best anyway. When it's so easy to slap a Pokemon on a team, it follows that its usage statistics will then be quite high. Those who played when Generation 4 was current will recall the lengthy period from Platinum through the Salamence ban in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, where Scizor was #1 in usage. Many a player complained about how it was absolutely everywhere, how tired they were of seeing it U-turn and bullet punch everything in sight, how even the sight of its sprite drove them nuts. And yes, Scizor was quite popular, but it's not the kind of high level of usage we're talking about today. Gen 4 Scizor peaked at approximately 32% usage, but some pokes have proved themselves so excellent that they get spammed to levels that would make even the most fervent complaints about Gen 4 Scizor reconsider their perspective as quaint and tame by comparison. These are the most used Pokemon of all time for singles. And for the most used Pokemon of all time, here is one of the most used VPNs on the internet, because this video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Surfshark VPN is an app and browser extension that allows you to place your computer or phone virtually in any country as if you're actually there. Surfshark has 3,200 plus servers in 65 countries. And of course, being a VPN, Surfshark keeps your outgoing data encrypted and safe. For example, I travel a decent amount, which means I'm often at the airport and need to use the public Wi-Fi to keep track of my spending. However, people on the public Wi-Fi at the airport could be lurking to access some of my sensitive data. But thanks to Surfshark, I just booted up, my data is safe and secure, and I can now check I probably shouldn't have spent $17 on that airport burger. But that's not all. Remember how I said they have all those servers in various countries? Well, that also comes in handy when on the go or at home. Sometimes I want to watch It's Always Sunny on Philadelphia, but it isn't available in the US or Canadian Netflix for some reason. But thanks to Surfshark, I can just connect to a UK server to watch UK Netflix, and now I don't have to pay the troll toll to watch the gang. These are just two out of the many features of Surfshark that are very helpful with day-to-day life. So if you want a sick VPN and also support the channel to help us produce more content, you can click the link in the description below or use my promo code FALSESWIPE to get Surfshark VPN at 83% off and 3 extra months for free. Now, before we begin, a few qualifiers. First, we're not going to put a true usage number on these choices because usage statistics are always reflective of a certain time and situation. Scizor's pinnacle of 32%, for example, was 1 month on the ladder. Instead, we'll use common sense approximations. Additionally, even usage stats aren't always fully reflective. For example, RBY Tauros sometimes comes in at less than 100% usage, not because there were players who dropped it, but because they won without having to reveal their Tauros. The sub 100% usage Pokemon tend to vary on a tournament by tournament basis too. We'll be sticking with a general threshold. Plus, many of the Pokemon on our list span multiple tiers. We're also going to exempt certain Pokemon, those that wound up banned for starters, since it follows that they, especially in the extreme cases, would be spammed to high usage if they were broken. It wouldn't shock you to learn, for instance, that Mega Rayquaza's usage before it was banished from Oraz Ubers was truly astronomical. This isn't necessarily a rule, and there are plenty of banned Pokemon that didn't have usage through the roof in some cases, like Gen 4 Wobbuffet. They weren't even particularly popular, but it's a good guideline for us. Finally, we will be sticking to the OU and Ubers tiers for singles, and as much as we'd enjoy delving into the incredibly popular Pokemon of various lower tiers, like Gen 3 UU Kangaskhan and Mienfoo across multiple generations of Little Cup, we have to set some sort of limit for ourselves, lest this video turn into some sort of Poke academic version of Infinite Jest. So with all that in mind, let's begin, and we'll kick things off with an example from the current generation. Since day one of Gen 9, Great Tusk has been one of the easiest Pokemon to throw on a team and succeed with. It brings an incredible diverse array of valuable utility and is nearly unstoppable in its consistency. A tremendous offensive-defensive threat with ferocious dual stabs, stellar attack and defense, and good speed, sometimes boosted further by Rapid Spin, which lets it act as hazard removal and one which easily threatens the tier's go-to anti-hazard removal Pokemon Goldango. Its photosynthesis ability also could fuel a speed boost, whether it's booster energy or Torkoal's sun support, enabling it to threaten would-be faster opponents like Dragapult right off the bat, a threat which keeps other threats in line. It's a pillar of support, with the aforementioned spin, hazard support of its own in Stealth Rock, and item removal in Knockoff, a threat in many forms, bolstering its stabs with the excellent coverage of Ice Spinner, making itself stronger and more difficult to revenge kill physically through bulk up, and the best part of all, it did so many of these things simultaneously without even trying. No wonder it's been spammed so much. Its usage was highest at the beginning of the generation, pre-DLC. At one point, the highest level of tournament play saw Great Tusk's usage reach more than twice that of the number 2 Pokemon, which was a tie between King Gambit and Goldango, which also means that Great Tusk was used more than both of them combined. They each came in at 35.75%, while Great Tusk boasted on an astonishing 72.58%. Tusk hasn't been as uncontested since the DLCs brought expanded Pokedexes, but it still regularly tops the usage charts, even as if it is now more closely followed by King Gambit and Goldango. Incidentally, these two Pokemon alongside Tusk form a sort of RBY Tauros Snorlax Chansey trio that defines much of their tier, and so we can give them honorary mentions. However, Great Tusk and its incredible popularity since have ranked among Gen 9's OU most defining features. Speaking of day one, we started with the most current gen, and now we'll go all the way back to the beginning. The Raging Bull is the original most spammable Pokemon in OU. Indeed, it is the most fundamental rule of RBY. Use Tauros on every team. Yes, Snorlax and Chansey come very, very close, and most players will also have 100% usage rate for them. But whereas there are some legitimate cases to drop them, incredibly rare though they are, Tauros possesses no such exception. If you want to push your glasses up your nose and nasally proclaim, well, actually, Tauros-less teams exist, then technically you'd be correct, but the key difference here is that dropping Tauros is always an inferior gimmick. Nothing else does what Tauros does, and nothing else can perform its role nearly as well. You are unequivocally at a disadvantage for not being able to throw a Tauros at your opponent, while they can do the same to you. When there's a Tauros, there's a way, and as scary as Zapdos can be sometimes, it still can't hold a candle to the king. Fierce dual normal stab including Hyper Beam, alongside its legendary crit rate, and even the freeze-inducing blizzard that effortlessly cuts through the normal resistant Rhydon, allow Tauros to threaten everything. Even its best counter, Cloyster, can no longer answer it if Tauros drops Earthquake for Thunderbolt, which also helps it a great deal against Slowbro and sometimes even Chansey. Not packing it on your team is simply making things more difficult on yourself. Your opponent will breathe a sigh of relief that you're running something less threatening, which no matter what you use in that slot, you will be. Half the time, the best response to opposing Tauros is your own Tauros. So unless you just automatically want to be at a disadvantage there, then yeah, Tauros always and forever. Snorlax is just about mandatory in RBY OU, so it alongside Chansey get an honorary mention for that generation. But there's no exceptions or two ways about it in Gen 2. Snorlax is required. Yes, there are some teams that attempt to drop Lax, specifically hardcore stall teams that want an extra wall. But there's a reason these teams just about never actually get used, especially when there's something on the line. It's because you always want Lax even on the slowest, bulkiest stall teams. Since after all, Snorlax is an incredible wall too. Whatever Snorlax does, it is unstoppable in Gen 2, nigh unbreakable, incredibly difficult / downright impossible to wall, whether it's a standard curse set or a mixed self-destruct variant, or Lovely Kiss is somewhere in the mix, or it's tearing through stall with Belly Drum, or it's stole walling offense with Rest Talk, or some mix thereof, because Lax can do anything. It becomes even more mandatory, if that can even exist, in Ubers, because it is even more necessary for staving off the mighty Mewtwo, and because it's the best Pokemon in that metagame as well. Yep, Snorlax is the best in the entire second generation. All 5 Ubers, Mewtwo, Mew, Lugia, Ho-Oh, Celebi, are worse than it. Plus, in Tauros-like fashion, sometimes you need Snorlax because there just isn't anything better to take on the opposing Snorlax. There is no serious, tangible, meaningful advantage to be gained from dropping Snorlax in either tier, so players playing to win don't. In another video, we crowned Gen 1 Mewtwo the most broken Pokemon of all time in singles, for the way it takes every single mechanic unique to RBY and cranks it up to absurd levels. The crit rate, the stab psychic in a gen where it drops the joint special stat a third of the time, amnesia that is basically 2 calm minds in a single turn, 32 PP recover alongside incredible bulk, the capacity to perma-freeze a check, utterly nightmarish. Imagine how foolish it is to not match the opposing Tauros with Tauros or GSC Lax with GSC Lax, and then amplify that by about 1,000,000. That's how downright imbecilic it is to not have a Mewtwo while your opponent does. This is basic knowledge figured out by kids with single-digit ages back in the 90s, and you don't want to get outsmarted by them, right? Now, GSC mechanics ensure Mewtwo doesn't have the same level of blasting through everything in sight, and it is not quite mandatory, but it's going to have incredibly high usage because it is an absolutely excellent Pokemon with a plethora of sets that match up incredibly well against most anything you're going to throw at it. Really look at it like this. What are you going to be using instead? It's like a Zapdos in OU. It can be dropped, but only in specific cases, and most of the time you want to be using it simply because of how good it is against everything. That kind of thing provides a ton of flexibility in battle. In fact, some GSC Ubers players even considered Mewtwo the best Pokemon in the tier for a time, and just as required as Lax. The opinion here is more contentious, but regardless, the first 2 generations of Ubers are very much Mewtwo's world. Not that subsequent ones aren't, for that matter. It's always been tremendous, but nothing quite like the sheer absurdity of the first 2, especially the first, of course. When Primal Groudon hit Gen 6 Ubers upon the release of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, it instantly reshaped the tier from a Xerneas-focused one to a metagame in its own image. Xerneas, oppressive and devastating though it was hardly a Pokemon for every single type of team. Primal Groudon, on the other hand, seriously straddled that border of being mandatory. From the faster hyper offense to the slowest stall, whether it was boosting itself or supporting with Stealth Rock, you could always use Primal Groudon. The typing, the move pool, and above all, the sheer base stats it possessed ensured it was GSC Snorlax-esque in being able to fulfill whatever role you needed it to. Even when uninvested, it hit absolutely hard from both sides of the physical special spectrum, with tremendous dual stabs, fire ones of course boosted by Desolate Land Sun, and even when uninvested, it had superb hit-taking capabilities. In fact, one of the best things it provided was giving every team a built-in check to the mighty Xerneas. Talk about turning the tables. All of this, by the way, on a Pokemon prized for its hit-taking capabilities, yet without any form of reliable recovery, not even leftovers. That's how beastly Primal Groudon was. Oh, and we mentioned the Xerneas focus it pulled the tier away from, but XY Ubers was also characterized by the immense threat of Specs Kyogre. Then Primal Groudon came along and eliminated non-Primal Kyogre from the game entirely. Primal Kyogre wasn't exactly beating everything in sight with Primal Groudon either, seeing as Primal Donkor alone was brandishing a form of Sun so strong it literally evaporated water moves. Forgive the easy joke, but it's as accurate as it is obvious. Using Primal Groudon was the offer you couldn't or shouldn't refuse. Its versatility, level of danger, and incredible usage continued into Generation 7, with even the addition of Zygarde Complete being insufficient to stop its nigh unfathomable power. That base special attack was put to good use with Hidden Power Ice, tearing right through. Primal Groudon's usage was constantly in the upper 90s, and yes, a newer generation's greater number of huge threats means becoming mandatory or non-mandatory is far more difficult, which just speaks to how incredible it was. Primal Groudon was, plain and simple, the single best Pokemon in the tier in both generations of its existence. Okay, this one might count as cheating, but it must be at least mentioned. We'll at least keep it short for that reason. Anyway, yes, Arceus has 17 different forms in Gens 4 and 5, and 18 in 6 and onwards, so it's easy to count. But then again, it's not like every form is used. Far from it. And still, the constant is its move pool and base 120 stats across the board, which means it does qualify. It's not like we're talking completely different Pokemon here. That move pool and set of base stats is indeed why, though there are so many great Pokemon in Ubers, just about every team should use some form of Arceus, even if its combined forms usage doesn't quite reach 100%, though it often does in many generations. It sure comes close. Its stat combination is incredible, and its move pool is pretty much perfect, and even improved in Gen 9 with the additions of Taunt and Dragon Dance, to say nothing of how utterly insane it becomes with Terastallization. Thus, with this perfect Pokemon, all that's left is its typing, and you get to choose whichever type you want for them? Yeah, that's a no-brainer. What else would you want to use over such some form of Arceus. Whatever type of Pokemon it is, the corresponding version of Arceus almost surely has it beat. Even in Gen 4, before it was banned, the 100 EV limited version of Arceus was just as essential. Duskmane appeared in Ultra Sun and Moon and instantly became Primal Groudon-esque in a way that it could fulfill just about any role through its superb typing, seemingly infinite move pool, and insane stat spread. In Gen 7, it also had the rather unbelievable quality of being able to pull off this kind of Lost Highway transformation into a completely different Pokemon. Ultra Necrozma, which was a Pokemon so ludicrously powerful, even by Uber's sky-high standards, that some players thought it should join Mega Rayquaza in Anything Goes. However, Necrozma Duskmane was an absurdly high usage metagame staple in its own right without any need to Ultra Burst, already demonstrated in Gen 7, then strongly reinforced in Gens 8 and 9. Like Primal Groudon, it was right at home on any type of team. As if its natural bulk wasn't enough, its Prism armor ability ensured that super effective attacks would have an even more difficult time breaking through it, so it weakened them to 75% of their original power. With the ability to hold leftovers and access to Morning Sun, its defensive sets easily took repeated hits, letting it grab Stealth Rock effortlessly, and boy would stab Sunsteel Strike. Talk about an absolutely amazing Xerneas answer. It was ferocious offensively as well. The Trick Room Swords Dance set was obscenely difficult for any type of team to stomach in Gen 7. Trick Room turning its lower speed to its advantage against offense, while Swords Dance slashed through bulk with brutality to make Leatherface blush. Then in Gen 8, it received Dragon Dance and Knockoff, becoming even scarier. The latter was also a wonderful addition to its support sets. Now in Gen 9, Terrestrialization elevates it to hitherto unseen levels of terror. The Necrozma Duskmane has been a top 3 Ubers Pokemon in every gen since its introduction, and the ease with which it's slapped onto every style of team contributes to superb usage stats. In Gen 7 and Gen 9, it's quote-unquote only generally in the 60s, which, make no mistake, is incredible. But in Gen 8, it genuinely approaches Primal Groudon levels of usage. Yveltal's place in Gen 8 Ubers is unique. Yes, it is an incredible Pokemon in its own right, of course, just as it was in Gen 7 and 6 beforehand. However, why does Yveltal regularly see 100% usage in Gen 8? Simple, because there is a terrifyingly broken Calyrex Shadow, which was even suspect tested at one point, yet managed to avoid the ban. And there is no pursuit. And without Yveltal to combat it, the entire tier falls apart. Go ahead, drop Yveltal, and watch as everything on your team gets Astral Barrage into oblivion. You need Yveltal to withstand these hits, to roost off the damage, and as far as Pokemon needed to counter something busted, you couldn't ask for anything better. It is, after all, blessed with an incredible set of stats and moves. Even without Calyrex Shadow around, it could be using similar sets, slicing and dicing with its beautiful mix of utility and offense. However, since Calyrex Shadow is as short on counters as it is, a great deal of the tier's most suspenseful, impactful dynamics revolves around the nuances of the never-ending battle of Calyrex Shadow attempting to find its way around the Yveltal standing in its path. It is that important, single-handedly elevating Yveltal's already amazing place in the tier to mandatory status. Incidentally, backing up Yveltal in usage for the ability to take on a significant portion of the metagame is not just the aforementioned Necrozma Duskmane, but Eternatus as well. The three are an amazing trio that are incredibly commonly seen together. Thus, Eternatus gets an honorary mention alongside them. As like Great Tusk, Kingambit, and Goldango in OU, the three here form a sort of RBY Tauros Snorlax Chansey dynamic for Sword and Shield Ubers. Another semi-cheating selection, as there are two different Pokemon. However, they are so similar they deserve to be grouped together. And the reason they are here is that both are, for the same exact reasons, so flawless in their debut generation. So powerful, bulky, fast, so diverse in their approach, nearly entirely bereft of meaningful weakness, that they become the most consistent Pokemon around, and there is no reason to not use at least one of them on your team. Whether you want Latios' extra power or Latias' extra bulk. And rest assured, Latios is still plenty tanky, and Latias still hits plenty hard. In fact, the two of them are so perfect, it is quite common to see both of them on the same team. How do you punish them? You don't. In later gens, this is, while not impossible, much more difficult to pull off, as the Latis' weak points are far more exploitable, and you don't want to give the opponent the exact same spots in two places. But in Gen 3 Ubers, nah, not at all. Here it is, the most iconic OU Pokemon of the past decade plus. More responsible than anything else for making players turn to UU or elsewhere just to stop seeing its face. A Pokemon packing the blessed combination of incredible typing, superb offenses, and solid bulk, strongly abetted by Intimidate, an ability so useful as a catch-all check to physical attackers, it is not uncommon to see it switch into super effective waterfalls. Landorus Therian does it all, and does it well. Choice Scarf, it's perfect, using its typing and bulk to hit the field, and its speed, power, and coverage to check opposing threats. When you know you're forcing them out, take advantage of the switch with U-turn. Bulky sets, absurdly easy to slap on a team, and covers so many of the biggest threats around. For the longest time, it was physically defensive to withstand beasts like Garchomp, but in Gen 8, it adopted special defense and became similarly tanky on that side of the spectrum. It uses its nigh peerless number of switching opportunities to aid its team through the most valuable utility in the game, U-turn, yes, as well as Stealth Rock, Knockoff, Defog, and it's even an amazing user of Toxic since its Mighty Stab Earthquake scares off steals and poisons that otherwise absorb it. Its physical hit taking also makes it a prime user of Rocky Helmet, letting it directly punish the contact moves which comprise so many physical attackers' movesets, playing offense while on defense. Speaking of Mighty Stab Earthquake, Lando T's utility is so good players often forget just how powerful it is, and that's not something you want to do against a Pokemon with a base attack stat rivaling Groudon. It packs a severe punch, and it has great diversity to how it can thrash the opponent too. In Gen 9, it's even added Taunt to its moveset, as if it wasn't providing enough already. Lando T's usage being incredible wasn't news, but at points during Generation 7, it genuinely became alarming, and many players were eyeing it warily as potentially unhealthy. It was well over 70%, which by modern generation single standards was utterly ridiculous. The last OU Pokemon that had regularly enjoyed that kind of usage was the metagame warping advanced Tyranitar. Tyranitar has always had high usage across old gen after old gen, including breaching some serious peaks in the weather wars of Generation 5, but nowhere has it been more quasi-mandatory and therefore spammed than in Gen 3, where its permanent sand goes largely uncontested, and this sand is the single most influential tier-shaping factor in the tier. Simply by switching Tyranitar in, you will have an easier time dealing with Suicune, which has no weak, as they say, except for sand. Tyranitar sand makes spikes significantly more scary and fast acting. Tyranitar sand prevents Salac reversal Heracross from existing and running over the tier. If you can gain leftovers in sand, you have a significant advantage, without even getting into the fact that it's the metagame's most diverse threat, packing incredible raw power with a killer move pool that allows it to run the most dangerous sweeping set in Dragon Dance, which itself has nearly countless permutations, to incredible wall breaking and choice band, mixed and substitute focus punch sets, to a bastion of offensive defensive utility in his pursuit, and 4 physical attacking variants, to the overlap and mixing and matching of these different possibilities. As a result, Tyranitar's usage in Generation 3 regularly ranged around and upwards of 60%, sometimes even 70%. This is absolutely huge in the vast in Gen 3 landscape relative to the constrictions of the first 2 gens, and indeed would not be matched for quite some time afterwards. Tyranitar itself in Gen 5 rivaled it, but it was always contesting that with sand against Politoed's Rain, which held it back from truly matching it, whereas advanced Tyranitar had no such equal. And that's it. Now, there are more Pokemon that could have been mentioned for sure, so let us know what you would have liked to have seen mentioned. And also let us know if you'd like to see such a video for lower tiers. There are plenty of interesting choices there. Remember, there's a reason why these Pokemon are so spammed. Sure, sometimes people are just lazy, but the fact of the matter is that oftentimes, these are just the best Pokemon for the job. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. As always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And thank you to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And thank you so much to our Platinum tier patrons. Thank you so much to Raven Daytona Ring, Sorazan Croxon, Stoneface Colin, Bingleton, Ray Ray, Daniel Isbeast, Glitcherton, Alex Sabo, Funky, Skylaria, and Chica Chihyo for their support of our videos. And follow my currently social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.